Most people think addiction is about seeking pleasure or a lack of willpower. But actually, in my experience, addiction is a rational response to highly uncomfortable situations or emotions that gets out of hand. In therapy, we call that a maladaptive coping strategy. Hi, my name is Mitch Schutte. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm a therapist, a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, and I'm a student in a psychology program. And on this channel, we talk about psychological concepts and tools that we can employ in order for us to live more productive and efficient lives. So let's learn what psychology can teach us about addiction as a maladaptive coping strategy. So what do I mean by that phrase maladaptive, besides trying to sound really smart? What that means is, coping strategies come in all different shapes and sizes, right? When things come up, we cope to try and feel better or to try and alleviate pain or function better in the long term. So sometimes we have what's called adaptive coping strategies, right? In terms of adapting coping strategies, we'd be talking about things like exercise, journaling, hanging out with friends, going to therapy. These would all be tools that we can use to cope with really powerful emotions or feelings that won't necessarily hurt us in the long term. And so a lot of times those are preferred. When we say the term maladaptive, we talk about coping strategies that seem initially good, but in the long term end up causing us a lot of pain and uncomfortability, right? Or a lot of issues. And so when we look at addiction, in the immediate term, right, it can seem like it's a pretty useful thing to do. Let's talk about someone who has social anxiety, right? So that person is nervous around being around people. And so they think, all right, if I drink this alcohol, my inhibitions will go down. I won't feel my anxiety as much, and I'll be a little bit more likely to go to the party and be outgoing. Now, let's say that this person drinks a couple beers, goes to a party, and has an excellent time. And they learn that when I drink alcohol, I don't feel as nervous around people, so that's what I do. Now, this sounds really good, right? However, if this person keeps drinking alcohol and can't stop, in the long term, it could lead to an addiction, DUIs, issues with money, interpersonal conflicts, physical dependency. These are a lot of things that I would see in my treatment of people who have addictions. But a lot of times when I would talk to them, they'd say, hey, I have really bad social anxiety. I drink so I can be around people. And that's why I started in the first place. And it just kind of got out of hand. So there's a couple of different levers that are coming into play when we're talking about someone getting hooked on alcohol, right? First of all, alcohol is extremely effective at eliminating anxiety in the short term, right? Like if I drink, I usually know exactly what's going to happen when I do that. And so therefore I have a lot of certainty about what's going to occur. However, my brain doesn't think about those consequences that could potentially happen if I continue drinking for a long period of time, because my brain is really just worried about eliminating that anxiety right now. So when I drink, I get relief. And so my brain and my body learn that when I feel anxious and before I go into social situations, I drink and that relieves the anxiety. It does not think so far ahead to bring those negative consequences like job loss, relationship strain, DUIs into the present. It is only concerned about the anxiety that it's experiencing right now. And so in terms of a coping strategy, extremely effective in the short term sometimes, right? But in the long term, it can be really problematic for us. And so one of the issues is that when we're trying to replace maladaptive coping strategies with adaptive coping strategies, we run into a couple issues. First, the adaptive coping strategies typically don't have the immediate relief that maladaptive coping strategies have, right? Like if I drink a beer, I don't feel anxious. If I journal, I may not feel anxious right away. It's tough for me to journal right before I go into a party. I can do breathing techniques, but they are not an additional add-on to what I've been doing. And so their effects can be slightly muted. And it's tough for my brain to do that calculation. That's like, hey, if I journal, if I'm around people, I'm not going to have as much stress in the long term. And it's going to be better for me because I'm going to avoid those consequences. It just says, this isn't booze. This isn't quite as good. We should go back to the booze. Not only that, you pretty much hijack your reward system in your brain So your dopamine system is highly dependent on alcohol when you start doing that. And then it gets really difficult for you to manage emotions when you're not drinking alcohol. And so one of the problems is that when people have been using alcohol for a long period of time, that's the only coping strategy that they've learned to use. And so someone who started drinking at the age of 15 or 16 and has used that for every single time they've gone out to feel better doesn't have many tools in their toolbox. And so a lot of times what we do, or what I do when I'm working with clients, is I'm trying to get them to employ adaptive strategies for a period of time where the benefits in their life start to exceed the negatives that they have. Another thing that we need to do, though, is replace the alcohol with something else, right? If all we do is remove the alcohol, we try and do the same things all the time and just white knuckle through it, that can be a really, really difficult road to travel. So what I tell my clients constantly is that what we want to try and do is get them out there into the world and find a purpose or something that they can do that's going to be as enticing or close to as enticing as their alcohol use. Whether it's exercise, whether it's their job, whether it's in relationships, whether it's being around people, like these are all good things you can do. And then obviously treatment is going to be a really big thing for people who seriously have an addiction issue. So what I would recommend, if you are struggling with alcohol addiction, first of all, if it's pretty severe, start working with a drug and alcohol counselor or psychologist to help you work through your issues. So you're working with a professional. One of the issues with addiction is that it isolates us, right? And so what we end up doing is we try and solve our own problem all the time, constantly. No one understands me. No one gets what I'm going through. And then we keep digging ourselves in a further hole because our solutions aren't working. However, when we recruit support from other people and we ask for help, that's when this problem actually gets solved. And so what I see in my life is when someone is finally willing to reach out and admit they can't quite do this on their own, which is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of resourcefulness and strength, that is when their life can change. And so first things you can do, reach out for help. Another thing you can do, try and use some other adaptive coping strategies in the moment to see if those can replace the alcohol use. And then if you've been drinking for a long period of time, your brain literally has to reset for a period of time. It'll take you anywhere from a month to 6 months for your brain to rewire to not be completely dependent on alcohol for anything. And so first thing, if you need help, go to therapy, try and employ some of those coping strategies, try and pull those negative consequences from your alcohol use into the present when you're thinking about drinking, get some accountability. Like these are all tools that you can use that I'll go into at a later point in time. The biggest thing is from this video, the point we're trying to hit is that addiction makes sense in the short term, right? You are not a criminal. It's not a lack of willpower that's causing you issues. You used the solution that made sense initially, and then it got out of hand. And what we want to try and do is get you to understand that that's okay and start moving forward with your life in the way that you want to. Thanks for listening today. If you found any of this entertaining or useful, feel free to subscribe to my channel.